Good people, we're still down for it. If you know, you know. Griot Sessions is back with information and conversation centered around topics that support the culture, the community as a whole, and where we live. We talk to those who make a difference, continue to make a difference, and sometimes come from the inside out to talk with us. Let's get started. So today I have someone I've known for a long time, Ronda Dixon, who is up as a candidate for seat number 39 for the Los Angeles County Superior Court Judge.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Thank
and
you.
welcome. So, when I met Rhonda, and I have to give a little bit of full disclosure on this, we met during our activism days in the entertainment industry. I was involved in film, particularly helping people to break that glass ceilings and that back door to getting more positions behind the camera. And Rhonda came and schooled me on the rap symposium. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And we were strong advocates. We really had a great thing going, but I want you to tell them about the rap symposium because this is not about me.
It was groundbreaking. I really wanted to be involved in entertainment when I first became a lawyer. But I started out in construction litigation. But interestingly enough, this guy that I was dating, he was A&R for Capitol Records. And through him, I met a guy named Jerry Davis who has since passed. He passed last year, actually. But he was actually the mastermind and the architect behind the rap symposium. But once it started going, I had such a passion for it that they voted me the president of the Committee for Excellence in Black Music, it was called.
Okay.
And we put on the rap symposium. So we had everybody who's anybody in rap, even before they were who they are, who they finally became, was at that conference. It was just like a who's who, Of course, all of NWA was there, Eazy-E, Suge Knight, Snoop Dogg, everybody was there. Ice-T, Tupac. There was MC8, Above the Law. There was a whole bunch of different groups that it just takes you back, you know what I mean? You have to know who they are. Some of them were... they came and, had their success, and some of them, they're still around. But it was a lot of different groups, and it was really interesting to explore this new art form, because at the same time there was another conference called the New Music Seminar that they would do in New York, and they incorporated rap and alternative rock, and they kind of saw those both as new music. And it was interesting. So they took over all these clubs in New York. So we kind of did the same thing. We had showcases, and we had a lot of different panels to tell people about the business of music, what they should be looking out for, and lyrical content. We were kind of concerned about social responsibility and lyrical content, because even at that time, that's when they started out with some negative statements. And then, of course, back then they did have Public Enemy and they had X-Clan, and so they did have some groups that were doing what we considered positive and sort of like Black Power, empowering type of things. But that kind of went by the wayside, and as we know now, it's all about,
Rakim.
Yeah.
And the rest of them.
Yeah, Eric Sermon, and there were so many, you can't even name everybody that was around then. And there was a lot more. Now there's more female rappers, but there was a time period when there weren't any for a while, except for maybe Nicki Minaj. But even before her, there was like a long period. Remember they had Roxanne, and what was her name? Money in the Middle, or what was her?
MC Light.
MC Light.
Yeah.
Queen Latifah.
Right.
They had a whole bunch of, Supersonic. JJ Fad.
Right. So,
Yeah.
as I recall, when you came, hip hop wasn't the brand name at that time. It was still rap.
Mm-hmm.
It was still very.
I thought it was hip hop before rap.
Well, it was hip hop before rap, but it wasn't. It didn't seem to be a brand as big as rap. And then at the time that we met, it began to transition and rap got left behind. This is how I recalled it. We were here in L.A. and actually,
I think it's the other way around because
Okay.
hip hop was a culture. Because
Right.
even when we did that, we also had people doing. Remember how they'd had the turntables?
Right.
They could spin like 2 or 3 turntables. We would have DJ battles.
Yeah.
We would have like people doing the graffiti.
Right.
You know, and it was an art form that was tied to the music. You know, skateboarding and all that kind of stuff. That all kind of was tied into it. And we did all that kind of stuff together. It was a culture.
Okay.
It was a whole culture movement. But I think I see rap as being a little more edgy, a little more rough, you know, sometimes more violent. Hip hop to me was more
Fun and dancing.
and
You're right.
yeah, it was a little more kind of fun, funny, quirky. You know, sometimes they would have raps that were just funny, but it just transitioned into a more edgy, more hardcore angle, and I think rap fits into that more edgy, hardcore angle.
So, like you said, the foundation of your involvement was to support people getting more visibility and control of their own musical path at that time. You know,
Yes.
being able to make the better deals. What kind of deals I know that you were involved in that helped people to secure, or shall we say, more positive and lucrative positions for themselves?
Well, I mean, one of the artists that comes to mind is Shaggy. His deal started out with a bidding war that started very low because in those days they did not pay reggae artists very much. They had it sort of a scale, and I would say that this implicit bias is throughout every business that we get involved in. But it was also into the rap music because literally they wouldn't pay. They had an amount of money they would pay. And then they didn't want to go, when I say they, the record companies, didn't want to go beyond that. And it was different genres. Like jazz, they didn't pay very much for jazz. They didn't pay very much for, hip-hop, rap. As a matter of fact, they wouldn't even sign it because remember, that's why NWA and those guys went to Macola Records. They couldn't even get a deal. And then they ended up making more money because they went independent.
Okay. So before that, you had gone to law school. You wanted to go into entertainment, law, and you talked a little bit about Shaggy. And
Well, I didn't get to finish with Shaggy. So Shaggy's
Okay.
bidding war ended at $1 million. And literally people were calling me. Simon Cowell called me. I didn't even know who he was. And he was calling me and he said, oh, I offer this much. But the next phone call doubled the amount. And I go, oh, well, I've got to take this call. And I had like 2 phones going and they were calling me and the bids were coming in like so much. And it was because he was located in the UK. And in the UK, their charts are extremely volatile. But at the time, he was moving up the charts. And he was on this show called Top of the Pops. Later on, these shows become like Pop Star that morphs into American Idol. But in the UK, there was a show called Top of the Pops. And he was on that show consecutively for 5 weeks in a row. And watching him on that show, all the different major record companies were bidding for him. And at the time that we got to the $1 million, I flew to England to close the deal. And the day that we signed the deal, he was number 1 on the charts.
so you also, when I met you, I think I met you after the Shaggy incident. Well, no. We met in, I'm going to date us, okay?
Okay.
Late 80s. For the rap symposium, and then I was with the industry roundtable for film, so I remember that was the late 80s.
Yeah.
Then we reconnected when my grandson and your son were in Little League
At Ladera. Yeah.
at Ladera, and then at that point, during that era of us reconnecting, you got involved with Tommy the Clown.
Don't even start with that.
Okay. and the movie Rise.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
basically, it was funny. what was his name? Phil. He was one of the vice presidents at CAA, and he called me. Phil Casey, that was his name.
Okay.
He called me and said, Rhonda, I got something here. I don't know what to do with it, so I figured you would. So I'm going to put together a meeting. So I go to ICM and meet with him. And he has this guy, Tommy the Clown. And he says, well, Tommy the Clown sold out the forum like 7 days in a row. Just basically radio and word of mouth. And he said, I don't know what to do with this, but I know there's something here, if he can sell out the forum like that. And with his battle zone thing, So, of course, I knew what to do. So we had a deal for him to make a movie about it. But it didn't quite work out. So there was another guy that came along, and he called me and said he wanted to do it. His name was Dave Chappelle. Dave LaChapelle. He's a white guy, not Dave Chappelle. Dave LaChapelle.
Okay.
And he was a photographer for Vogue. And he had done a lot of beautiful work, and he was shooting album covers. He had done an album cover for Shaggy before, but that's what he was known for, doing album covers and photography. So I told Tommy, I said, well, if you let him do it, at least you're going to look good, So and the film was amazing. I mean, the cinematography was beautiful in that, and the dance scenes and everything like that. So yeah, it came out really well. I was really pleased with it.
So you guys hear some little history here. So my goodness, late 80s is a long time ago. Over 30 years. Is it 30, 35 years? Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness.
We don't have to keep discussing how
well, only because
we're
gonna get back to you running for seat number 39 in the Superior Court judge. And your ads already on the radio talk about your 30-year legal experience, so
that's true.
We're not spring chickens. So what, but what we have to bring in here is experience also brings in wisdom.
That's true.
Okay. And you've seen a lot of things happen. You've seen some fruits of your labor in the various areas, particularly in the rap. So what happened with the rap symposium and that effort is people gathered and they got a renewed sense of control, of self-control, Now, the system that we exist in the United States has the tendency to, once we begin to rise, just to play on that word with the movie, is try to knock us down with so many angles. And we always try, and we have overcome. Mm-hmm. That's, to me, is the meaning of that old spiritual. Is it's going to be thrown at us. We're going to overcome. And so one of the issues in our community has been the terrible substance use that has harmed us in many ways, and I think that part of that is some of the laws against it that created a swelling of imprisonment and records for Black people, particularly Black men. And so you also then took a look at that and came up with a recovery center.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. I founded Dixon Recovery Center in, I believe it was 2007, 2008. And the reason I did that was because I had seen this problem in my community for some time. When I was a little girl, I actually saw on two separate occasions, I found two people that had been overdosed, and they died, and they were in the alley behind 51st and McKinley. And I was about in the third grade when I saw this. And I also, once I was in the entertainment industry, I noticed people were doing drugs. And I kind of didn't really notice it as much. But then when I started Dixon Recovery, I ended up meeting up with some people that had been in the industry. I actually started it because one of my former clients hadn't seen him in 7 years. And I ran into him and he says, oh, this is what I've been doing. And I know you like to help people, so I think you would like to do this too. And he took me around to his clinics and different places. And I said, yeah, I think I can do this. And so I did. You get what's called the helper's high, because you know that you're helping. But I did realize there was a problem in our community, but until I delved into that deeper, I didn't realize that it was a root cause of many of the problems in our community. And one thing I used to say is like, it's like weaving a rug. You know, when you can pull that one piece, you can unravel it. And a lot of times that piece goes back to substance abuse. Back in the 70s, we had the scourge of heroin. And then right after that, like a 1-2 punch, came crack cocaine. And they just took our proud community down. When I was young in the 1960s, everybody was married and they were nuclear families. Even the people that we think of as gang members, the beginning, Tookie Williams, they were nuclear families. It wasn't because of single parents that they became gang members and, became, so incorrigible and everything like that. That's not what happened. The policing in our neighborhoods, things like that. And I have to say that I got, the LA County Bar Association, the Judicial Evaluation Committee, decided that I wasn't qualified because I said something negative about the police. And I said, well, actually, I'm a criminal defense lawyer, so if I don't do motions to suppress, what I had said about them was that they needed more training, and I think they do. They need more training on sensitivity. They need more training on gangs. They constantly say that they're experts on gangs, but every time I see this expert, they didn't know anything or didn't grow up in a community where there were gangs. They don't understand anything about the gangs, and they continuously say people are in a gang when I know for a fact this person isn't in a gang, So, I mean, it's just something that they do, and I think they do need more training. You can see the bias the implicit bias in the policing. I mean, the numbers don't lie. More people of color get picked up and ask for their driver's license, and their rights get violated, and they have, they search their vehicles and search their person illegally more frequently than other people. That's not something I'm saying just to say it. I mean, there's statistics that bear that out.
Yeah, so one of the things I recognized, and I'm glad you talked about it, was the effect of policing on our neighborhoods. So there's been a lot of activism toward reducing that effect. And while we're dealing with them increasing the prison population for drug abuse or commercialism of it, the other side of that is mental health as well.
Yes, it is.
So I know that a lot of the recovery centers had to deal with that aspect. Mm-hmm. What kind of partnerships did you have around that as well? So this mental health piece is very, very tricky. In my opinion, there's not enough effective treatment centers for mental health. And the issue is co-occurring disorders. And then we don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg. Did they start self-medicating because they had a mental health issue, and then they take recreational drugs to medicate that? I feel like when I was involved in that and I was able to hear people's story and just see their whole life pattern, a lot of it's generational. A lot of it is a family dysfunction. I even had a tutoring program, and one thing I found out was with the kids, the dysfunction at home was what was causing them not to do well in school. Every kid is not the same, but when you test kids that are in the school system, I'm talking about the public school system mostly, when you test them, you'll find that they're in the 3rd and 2nd grade level on math and English language arts in the 8th grade. And when they're that far behind, it becomes extremely difficult to remediate it, especially when you don't start until the 8th grade. So to that end, I sit on the board of the ISEF Charter School, Inner City Educational Foundation, and I'm on the academic committee. And what I do is try to make sure that we use the interventions that we know we can, which are tutoring, but it's using, I want to say artificial intelligence in a sense, but it's using, you get an individualized program for each child. You test them to find out the gaps in their learning, because they may be functionally illiterate. And that's a lot of people
are coming through the school system and they're functionally illiterate. They can function up to a certain point, but there's certain gaps in their learning that stop them when they come to the point of having to do algebra and any kind of higher math, and when you get to reading comprehension, and when you get to English literature, and when you really are analyzing things, that's where you'll find the gaps come up. But and it's because of a foundational problem. They're not teaching them in the second and third grade. They have too many. The teacher ratio is too high. The student-teacher ratio is too high. And they're not really making sure they got the foundation down before they move on to the next grade level.
That's a subject that's dear to my heart. One of the things that I investigated and tried to interrogate was the dysfunctionality of our homes. Okay, I could be a little naive about that, but I think there's enough research out there that shows that the effect of, and I'll just say Jim Crowism, okay, and
you can even go back as far as slavery.
Okay, slavery too, because I did listen to several lectures by Dr. Joy DeGroot talk about the effects of post-traumatic slavery syndrome, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. And when we were doing that work in our respective industries, you with music and me with film, back in the 90s, one of the problems, and because people were aware of what we were doing, so many people came from other areas, seeking at least some advice from, and what we were doing was boots on the ground, of doing community work. There's a lot of people that do food programs and whatnot. So what you were trying to do was reach the general public through helping the people in the music industry have more control. And then I was trying to work on the images that Hollywood and news agencies were portraying, but circling back to what I was originally trying to get to is the effects of all of what the system has thrown at us, created so many problems. Now we can't go back and complain, but what we can do is move forward with solutions to what we can form today. And that's why I'm asking you, certain questions, trying to find, because as you aim yourself toward the bench, I think it's okay for people to know what your values are. Okay.
Well, one of the things I stand for is alternative sentencing, and we have something called collaborative courts, but we don't have enough of them. And the pathway to get to them is a little cumbersome because you have to do a motion before a judge, and that judge has to agree that this person is suitable to be tracked into that program. And many times they'll deny that, and especially when maybe a person has done a crime, and if they've actually committed a crime, then they don't want to track them into that. They want to punish them. But punishment, I estimate that 30% or more of the people that are incarcerated have mental health issues. And incarceration itself is enough to give you a mental health issue. But homelessness also causes mental health issues. And the disparities of the poverty in our community causes that. A few years ago in 2018, I actually was taking a course at Harvard in urban policy. And I looked at the policy map for the area that I actually was born in, which was 90011. And when I looked at that, I wanted to see what was the median income for a black male 30 years old. This is 2018. So this is probably based on the census that was the last census in that decade, right? But do you want to guess what the median annual income of a black male 30 years old was in 2018?
2018.
Mm-hmm.
I probably saw the data, so I'm not going to say it out loud. You go ahead.
$6,500 a year.
Oh, no. I was thinking 20, but
Yeah.
I must have not seen the data. Okay.
No, it's shocking.
That's shocking.
The type of poverty that represents is only seen in the Deep South. I mean, this is L.A. This is one of the most expensive cities in the world. $6,500 a year is probably just general relief. And this is the reason, and the reason driving behind that is because they have felonies and they can't work. So now they are part of this homeless population that blossomed. And when they shut down, so when I had Dixon Recovery on 48th and Crenshaw, in 2013, they shut down 200 clinics all at once. By 2015, we had a huge homeless population. And it keeps burgeoning and getting bigger and bigger because the rents keep going higher. In 2015, the city of Los Angeles issued about 4,700 building permits. Those building permits were for new housing, but none of those building permits really, they're not doing affordable housing. These are all these market rate houses where a one bedroom is over $3,000. So this is how we get to where we are today. We have all this inventory of all this housing, and they've even converted a lot of office spaces. After COVID, they converted office spaces into residential housing. So downtown LA is now mostly housing, but yet most people can't afford it, and that's why we have this large homeless population.
And this doesn't just touch Black men; it touches so many in the poverty level.
Well, people are being driven to the poverty level. I mean, you can have a middle class salary, but in LA, you may not be able to afford to buy a house, and you may not be able to even afford to live in an apartment. So it's very difficult, you know. A lot of people are working poor. I mean, one day when I was downtown, 6 a.m. in the morning, I see a lady coming out of a tent, obviously dressed for work. She's one of the working poor.
Yes, another disclosure, I am now visiting. I used to live in LA for decades. And so, and I was telling someone earlier, it could have been you, that it's worse here in LA than when I left.
It is. I can feel the difference. I can feel the levels of violence. When you talked about why I want to be on the bench, we talked about collaborative courts and alternative sentencing. I do think, and I have seen, the power of alternative sentencing, and I know that it can, restorative justice can be healing. When I was at Dixon Recovery, I helped many people to recover, and some of those people were directed to come to my clinic by they were reentry people, or they were directed as part of their sentence to, go through substance abuse treatment. And I would always make sure they were housed, and by the end of their time with me, they had a job, they were, fully recovered. Not everybody recovers, but for those who wanted it and we were able to get them to that point, we were able to do that. But I always made sure my people were housed. And so I think that broke the safety net when they shut down 200 clinics pretty much all in the same year.
How interesting. When an election is coming up and we talk to various candidates about their run for this and that, and there's a reason why a person wants to do that. But a lot of times we go to the polls, and I'll tell you, voting for judges is like a little mind-blowing, only because most of the time we know absolutely nothing about them. But we know that it's important to cast a vote for them because they're going to sit and weigh in judgment a lot of our futures in our neighborhoods and in our communities. So, and for our loved ones. Mm-hmm. So, I remember years ago reading a bit of a tract of a judge in Inglewood. I believe it was Roosevelt Dorn. And at that time, there was mandatory sentencing. Okay, that was probably a little bit of that still is occurring, mandatory sentencing.
It's still here. Mandatory minimums are still here.
Yeah, and we want to talk a little bit about I don't know if you can, and I really don't know what we can talk about, but I'm going to ask questions, okay? So Roosevelt Dorn began diversionary sentencing or diversions,
okay? That's it.
Because and the criticism of that from, shall we say, powers that be, was that he wasn't supposed to do that. But he says, I'm the judge. I am going to do this. What kind of leeway is now existing for people on the bench? I know that there is set law, and there might be a better term for that you have to abide by. And then I know there's ambiguities in some of the law. And then there's areas that's way outside of even that you can have the possibility of setting precedents. And I want to tie that in later on to why it's important for Black women to run for office. So back to diversionary laws, and what is it about the bench that you can and cannot do?
Well, that's a big, long question right there. That's pretty broad. So I'm going to narrow it down a little bit. So judges have power when it comes to sentencing. So they can give what's called a court's indicated. So the DA will give an offer. You can go to the judge and ask the judge for an offer. The problem with the offer that comes from the judge is that a lot of times the DA likes to stack up a lot of charges, whether they're related or not. They just can stack them up. If you take a judge's offer, you have to plead to the sheet, which means, like, for instance, I had a client not too long ago in Northern California. He pled to the sheet. The DA was strongly asking for 19 years. He was clearly under the influence of a drug when he went on a spree and never had done anything like that before. But she wanted 19 years in state prison. And she was pushing really hard. I mean, she was very adamant about 19 years of state prison. And she had stacked up so many charges. She said she said, I'm just giving him 12 now, but I mean, I could have done more. So it aggregated up to 19 years in state prison with enhancements and all these other things. And the long and short of it is that he was offered 5 years by the judge. And interestingly enough, the judge was Hispanic and the prosecutor was Asian and the probation officer was Hispanic. And I mentioned that there was a little bit of a racial disparity. And the judge goes, well, we're all ethnic, minorities here. And I'm saying, but nobody's gone through slavery. That's on the other side of it. I'm sorry, but it's not the same type of ethnic minority and it's not the same type of disparity that you guys have had based on what this young man has had. So it turns out that he goes to state prison and they are changing his sentence. They felt that it was too harsh. And I just got a letter from them saying that they're going to take off some of the enhancements, that it's an illegal sentence. And this is what I wanted to get to because there are 20,000 people waiting for resentencing in Los Angeles County today, 20,000. That means that the sentences that they were given were also illegal sentences. Maybe they may not have been at the time because we have some laws that have changed in the last 3 to 4 years that have allowed for it to take off enhancements, take off the gang enhancements, take off the long gun enhancements. So those have come into play. But you'll find that when you have a defendant that is of a certain persuasion, they have no problem giving them long sentences, recommending the high term when they have no priors, recommending that they stack up enhancements and get to long periods of time, to the point where they had to make a law. The state had to make a law stating that it's called AB 124. You have to look at mitigation factors if a person is from 18 to 26 when they commit a crime. You have to look at such factors as did they grow up in foster care? Did they have dysfunction in their family? Did they have substance abuse going on in their family? Were they molested? We know that some of these traumas contribute to them committing crimes, and we also know that their cerebral cortex has not been developed until they're 26, so they're making decisions that are life-changing decisions when they don't have the ability to have critical thinking skills to make the right decisions. So we're actually looking at that now. And many times in my cases, I'll do what's called a mitigation brief. And the judge gets to listen and look at those things. But like I said, some judges just, don't look at it because they just, look at the crime and say, okay, this is this. But I will say that there was a judge in Santa Barbara not too long ago, and this shocked me. Okay, the person is a young lady. She was 32 years old. She was dating a man that was 26 years old. She smoked marijuana with him, and they claim she went into a marijuana-induced psychosis and stabbed him 100 times with 3 different knives. And they all agreed that she was in a marijuana psychosis, so she was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, and the judge exercised his discretion to give her probation, even though a human life was taken. Now, the DA responded, this is going to be, the DA responded by saying that this is a case where a privileged young white woman was able to convince an old white judge to give her probation. He literally said that she was naive, and he blamed the victim and said that he gave her this potent weed. He was 26. He said he gave this naive young woman this potent weed, causing her to go off on a psychosis and start going stabbing him. And she stabbed her dog, she stabbed herself, she stabbed him.
Yeah, that goes back to a lot of the studies now showing, and the studies being, cultural, social studies that show that society's attitudes towards different segments, being innocent and young black, I will just say young black girls and boys, looking dangerous at the ages of 6 and 7 and 8 years old.
Yeah, that's true. And that's an implicit bias that if you were to point it out, maybe the person might realize they have it, but at the time they won't realize they have that bias. They just feel like this is how it should be. And you can see how the sentences go. You can see the breakdown of people that get life sentences as opposed to those who do not for the same exact conduct. Because I can tell you that a black male that never had any crimes and his girlfriend gave him some weed that was potent, and then he stabbed her, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have been the same outcome. I'm pretty sure he'd be looking at 25 to life, possibly LWOP, life without the possibility. I'm pretty sure he would. But hey, I don't know. But that's pretty much what I see happen every day.
So the structure of the judicial system in our society over a long period of time only had a certain face. There were some good people involved, of course, but then unfortunately the majority adhered to what I call Americanism, which adjudicated on the status quo of support of the system. And we're trying as a citizenry who's going to the polls, we're trying to make some corrections, not to let people off just because, and forgive me for speaking things in a very plain sense, but I want people to understand at least some of the questions that I like to pretend or act like I am a plain old person, but I'd like to know some things. And you're very knowledgeable in this area. But the history of that comes up to this point right now. And so we were talking about set law that's already, that you can't change, that you... What was an example of a set law that you would have to adjudicate, that you
Well, so the jury is a trier of fact. Once they find someone guilty, depending on what charges they find them guilty of, then comes the penalty phase. At that point, the opposing counsel, like the defendant's counsel, can put in a mitigation brief at that point for the judge to consider. But on the other hand, the district attorney can also bring in the victims to talk about victim impact. And which is fair. I mean, we voted on that, and that is fair. They should be able to give their impact statement, and then we give the mitigation statement, and then the judge looks at those two things. And there's also sentencing guidelines that the judge is supposed to follow. Some of them are not discretionary. They actually had to make them not discretionary by saying shall instead of using the word shall instead of saying may. May means there's discretion. The judge may do something, then that means he has discretion. He or she has discretion. But if it says shall, then they're not supposed to. The judge must follow whatever that directive is in the law because it says they have to.
And then when it comes time to an ambiguous sentencing or determination,
the judge has discretion if it's ambiguous. If there's any,
so there's no shall involved. That's in the may territory.
In the may territory, yes. And so, technically, they're probably going to appeal that case that I told you about, but because probation is highly unlikely in a manslaughter case, but this happened, and to me, it's a case of first impression of a marijuana-induced psychosis. I didn't even know that was possible. So,
well, there's word out there that fentanyl is being cut into a lot of the marijuana.
I don't know. I mean, they tested the marijuana. I don't know all the facts here. So,
okay.
But I think they're saying that it was a hybridized strain. That,
okay.
Because sometimes by
like
hybridizing,
yes,
they can maybe put a higher level of THC or whatever the psychoactive ingredients are.
Right. So, and that's why I brought up what Judge Dorn had began to do, and we're witnessing a lot of diversionary, behavior in courts now, and a lot of judges do, that I have. And just to let the audience know, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and but my home and a lot of family are still here, so I'm here being nosy, and I still love and care about L.A. and a lot of what I do is in support of that. So anything I can do to bring back good stuff, I will do. And what's happening is I do hear a lot of the candidates, even, and we're talking about the South, talking about how they care for the people, and so a judge has to be able to relate to people.
Yes.
That's why I like to discuss community work.
Yes.
That you've been involved in, so it looks like you've had a long history of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, a lot of times we go to the polls, cast a ballot for a judge. There's so many names out there, and you already mentioned it just a moment ago about what is the name of the agency that qualifies you? And I believe this is this is a quasi.
They don't qualify this. So this is the thing that needs to be clarified about them.
Okay.
They are a self-appointed. The LA County Bar Association is a voluntary bar. I'm not even a member. So they're not the state bar. The state bar, actually, they have what's called a judicial, it's called Jenny, and that's a judicial evaluation. Their judicial nominating committee has power. You know what I mean? They look at certain things, and their judicial council, they actually censor judges as well. And they are the body that, oversees judges, as well as the appellate courts. But LACPA has decided that anybody that wants to be a judge in LA County, they are going to, whether you want to or not, they're going to evaluate you. So I have another Ronda who's running for seat 12, Ronda Heyman. We were both considered unqualified to be a judge by LACPA, Judicial Elections Evaluating Committee. And it's interesting that they said that, but in her case was because she's going against a sitting judge. And in my case, it's just because they feel that I'm not a prosecutor. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. They asked me some very weird questions that, coming from the substance abuse treatment background, I know about evidence-based practices, and I know that when you evaluate people or when you any of these things have to be tested. They have to have some efficacy. They have to show that they have validity, right? So let's say in 2019, when they evaluated judges, they evaluated Julia Spears to be qualified, and they evaluated Armando Duron to be not qualified. Turns out Armando Duron is a commissioner, and he's very, very well liked and very, very good at what he does. Very qualified. But Julia Spears, who is now a sitting judge, who was sent to Compton family law court, and her background was in criminal law previously. That she didn't. She had a 10-page censure from the Judicial Council. So now, when I mentioned that to them, they said, "Oh, well, we called her not qualified this time." I said, "You had to, because then it would have called into question your whole situation where you said she was qualified, and clearly she was not." But they asked me questions that didn't make any sense. The first question they asked me was, "Do you regret representing that rapper Tory Lanez?" And I go, "What does that have to do with my ability to be a judge? You know, what does it have to do with that?" Then they told me, "Well, you'll be giving up a lucrative career to be a judge. I mean, are you sure you want to take a pay cut?" And I'm like, I've already factored all that in, but how does that have anything to do with my ability to be a judge? And then there was another weird question they asked me, but they were all biased questions.
I didn't want to go to Fani Willis just yet, but it smacks of that kind of privilege exhibited by a faction to undermine, people that come from our community who can sit in great judgment and wisdom to support the law. And so, but we're going to hold off on. I want to get your take on what's been happening like that, because it's not the first time. It won't be the last time, but it's a big time right now.
Well, I think what it is they don't want independent thinkers on the bench.
Yes.
They like the bench the way it is, and so the bench right now is mostly prosecutors, and they're going to be. So when you get elected, people have asked me, seat 39, where is that? It's not a place. Once you get elected for seat 39, the presiding judge will put you where they need you. And likely if you are an active DA like Jacob Lee, one of my, the people that's running against me, he's been a DA for 13 years. He's a calendar deputy, and he's major crimes and all that. But he's supposed to be more qualified than me. He's been an attorney for 13 years, and he's only practiced criminal law. What they're probably going to do with him is put him in the family law or the civil court, where he probably doesn't want to be and doesn't have any experience there. So what happens is you get these judges when you're in court. Haven't you ever noticed you go to court and the judges seem grouchy and they're just mean, and they like, "You're in contempt. If you say one more word, I'm putting you in contempt of court." And you're like, what is going on? We pay their salaries. Why are they being so disrespectful and rude and mean to people? I don't know. But in my courtroom, that wouldn't happen. I feel like everybody deserves respect. And I feel like my job is to be a referee. My job is to make sure to protect the rights of the civil rights of the litigants, as well as to protect the rule of law and make sure that it's properly applied.
Thank you. A little coughing fit here. Yes. So I noticed, and I'm glad you brought up some of the behaviors of how that agency qualified or disqualified. So I know that I think there's like about four of the people running for your seat in 39.
There's 3 people.
3.
Yeah.
Right. And I think half of them are, well, I noticed that Antonovich had made some recommendations. And I wondered about the background of Lee and Napolitano. They seem, no, let's see.
Well, Lee is the guy. He's a prosecutor.
Yes.
And
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, he's a prosecutor. But Napolitano, he says he sits on the parole board, but he also says that he's a mayor of the city of Manhattan Beach.
Yeah, yeah. So,
and interestingly enough, Manhattan Beach, you remember, That's where Bruce's Beach is.
Yes.
It used to be a black city. My grandmother was telling me about how it was a place where they could go. There was a place called Val Verde. There was a place in Idlewild, and then there was Bruce's Beach. And she was telling me about this way before this whole thing started about Bruce's Beach. She was telling me, yeah, we could all go there, and that's where we'd hang out. And also Santa Monica. Now they're talking about giving back a part of the Santa Monica that was called the Inkwell, because there was a First AME church there. And a lot of Venice was also black back in the day.
So I noticed that they got an easy qualification of qualified.
They did.
Easy.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Napolitano, they claim that, they felt that I didn't have enough trial experience, but I don't see where he has trial experience. And he's actually a city council member, and I guess he sits on a commission, the parole board commission. So, yeah. So I don't get that, but I get, but there's certain things he has in his favor that I don't. But I'm the only female, and I'm the only female of color in that race. George Turner is in the race. He's a public defender, but. Like I said, I have nothing negative to say about anyone. I just think that we need people from the community that care about the community and that have proven that they do to sit on the bench. We have to balance the bench. We need more women on the bench. We need more people of color on the bench, and we need more people that are from the community on the bench.
Right. Thank goodness I'm not a news show, so I don't have to be balanced in any reporting. But I can say this: I will be balanced. Okay, in that we do. If there's any information I need to set out as a challenge, but the only thing I can do right now is challenge the system, okay? Mm-hmm. And I'll go back to what a lot of people are saying, and I know you've talked about this, is the qualifying board, quasi, self-appointed board, doesn't look as kindly to defense and women of color, people of color, mm-hmm. in their qualification.
It's
now,
true.
How is that being? I mean, what kind of challenges is going up on that now? I mean, what's being done to advocate?
I'm trying to challenge it.
Out?
Myself and Rhonda Heyman are trying to challenge it, but even the news. The news outlets don't want. I mean, it's sort of like it's a bully pulpit that they have, and the person who's the head of it right now is the prosecutor. So, obviously they have this bias, and, even Holly Hancock brought it out. She's now a sitting judge, but when she first ran, they said that she was just qualified, and she said, well, I've been an attorney for many years, and why is it that an opponent of mine who's a DA who has the same amount of years of experience can be considered well qualified or exceptionally well qualified, but I'm merely qualified. And I take issue with even using the word unqualified because it's a misnomer. All you need to do to be a judge is have practiced law for 10 years, period. That's all you need to do. And so how can somebody be not qualified when the rules alone make them qualified? There's a judge that, the judge that Rhonda Heyman is going against, never practiced law. She passed the bar, opened a bagel shop. Then after many years decided she wanted to be a judge, ran for judge and became a judge and has been a judge for several years now. But the issue is, obviously that's not a qualification. So their whole idea is just whatever they're doing is biased. It doesn't have any utility except for they're just trying to slow us down to make sure that people say, oh, she's not qualified, so she can't be. They also made some other statements that I thought were ridiculous, and other people have challenged them. I believe a lady named Victoria Roberts did challenge them, but she lost in court because of what's called an anti-SLAPP suit. So in California, it's very hard to sue someone for defamation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this body then, I'll tell you, the first thing that came to my mind is it costs money to run for office.
It does.
Okay. And I know that a lot of people from our community may not have the same big budgets as others.
That's correct.
And a lot of those budgets I know is funded by law enforcement
That's true.
associations.
That's
Okay.
true.
Might that be part of the bias of?
Well, yes, all of that is part of the bias because, like I said, one of the first things they said was you said something negative about the police, I guess, in a podcast previously. I might have made a statement that I felt they needed more training, which I still think is a fair statement.
So to them, that was a negative?
Yes.
Okay.
But to be honest with you, I don't know anybody that hasn't had some kind of negative contact with the police. I mean, my first negative contact was when I was a little girl. I was about 8 years old, and I was riding in the passenger seat of the car with my father, and my father's dark complected, and I'm light complected. So they stopped my father. It was about 10 o'clock at night. They stopped him. They were calling him the N-word, in this, in that, in this, get out the car, N-word, and, just a whole bunch of that. And my father was complying with everything they said, but he didn't want to get out of the car because he knew that wasn't going to be a good move for him. And I could hear his voice and I could hear the tone of their voice, and I just blurted out, "Please don't kill my daddy." And they saw me and they said, oh, there's a little girl in the car. Oh, okay, leave him alone. But what do you think could have happened to the next black man that they stopped? Because they didn't stop him for any legitimate reason.
Time is flying. I don't know how much we're going to get into the Fani Willis thing except to talk about what you've already talked about, which is the privilege of the opposition. We know that this is a high-profile trial that she's involved in, the prosecution of the highest leader of the nation, who was caught with both hands in the cookie jar of security documents, and I can't remember everything that they're doing there in Georgia.
Well, with Georgia, though, it was election tampering.
Election tampering.
He literally requested that the governor lose some votes, enough for him to win, because it was a close margin. And quite frankly, he did it because there was an assumption that it was done in the case of Stacey Abrams, because he was the Secretary of State at the time. And remember, he did a strong, strict purging of the voter rolls leading up to that election for governor.
So now they're going after the prosecutor because she had her stuff together.
Well, this is the problem. I don't think they should be able to do that. I mean, just like they have qualified immunity for police officers, a lot of people don't realize that the Supreme Court is one of the most conservative bodies and has been for many, many years. Only 20 years out of the 200 years that they've been in existence have they ever been liberal. And that's when we got the Miranda, we got Gideon, we got the Miranda warning, we got Gideon saying that you have the right to a public defender. We got Roe versus Wade. We got the Brown versus Board of Education. Those were in short periods of time in which the court was liberal. Now, during the time that everyone was in the street rioting about George Floyd, there were 7 cases in that period of June, July, that went up to the Supreme Court on qualified immunity. They denied cert to all 7 of them to leave the system the way it was, when the people were crying out to change the system.
I want to thank you for this wonderful conversation. I feel like we had a lot more to talk about, but time is of the essence. So Ronda Dixon is running for Superior Court, Los Angeles County Superior Court, seat number 39 as judge, and the election is imminent, and I do look forward to you eventually getting on that bench and serving the community. And I don't know how much a judge can help correct imbalances in our society, but that is my hope for the slates that are out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.